Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of my amazing patrons. Once a month, patrons vote on what commander that they want to see in an upcoming episode. The commander that gets the most votes wins. And the commander that they chose for this month was Lynde, Cheerful Tormentor. Lynde is a 2/4 human warlock with Death Touch that costs 1 blue, black, red. She has, whenever a curse is put in your graveyard from the battlefield, return to the battlefield attached to you at the beginning of the next end step. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may attach a curse attached to you to one of your opponents. If you do, draw 2 cards. So obviously, Lynde is, well, all about curses. She is an interesting push-pull commander that helps mitigate the downside of curses in a very, well, somewhat risky way. The main downside of curses is that, well, when you attach them to a player, that player can become a big target and also can become very hampered by the curses, and yeah, that player can get taken out once all those curses are piled on them. But once that player is taken out, those curses are just gonna go straight to your graveyard. But thanks to Lynde again, you get to mitigate that downside by getting those curses back. Unfortunately, they come back attached to you. Obviously, there's a way to get rid of those curses again, though, and to give them to someone else, because at the beginning of your upkeep, you can attach a curse attached to you to one of your opponents, and if you do, you draw 2 cards. So, yeah, you can just redistribute those curses out to your other opponents that are remaining, and on top of that, you get some card advantage out of it too as well, which is very nice. And of course, with that, there's some really interesting things that we can do with that, but we'll get to that here in a bit. And actually, one thing really quick, every single card in this deck outside of the commander is less than $1, so it is a very budget-friendly deck. Regardless, what are those cards in this deck and what are those curses that we're going to be utilizing? Well, let's jump into it to find out. First up, let's talk about some very simple curses like Curse of Stalked Prey, Curse of Chaos, and Curse of Inertia. Curse of Stalked Prey is going to enchant a player, and whenever a creature deals common damage to enchanted player, put a +1 counter on that creature. Curse of Chaos says whenever a player attacks enchanted player with 1 or more creatures, that attacking player may discard a card. If the player does, they draw a card. And then Curse of Inertia says whenever a player attacks enchanted player with 1 or more creatures, that attacking player may tap or untap target permanent of their choice. So even though these are very simple curses, they can be very effective. By placing them on an opponent, we are giving players an extra benefit for actually attacking that opponent. So we can put a target on someone's back and make it less likely that the other players are going to be attacking us because of those extra benefits that they get when they attack that other player. We can also utilize curses like Curse of the Nightly Hunt, Curse of Death's Hold, and Curse of Verbosity. Curse of the Nightly Hunt says creatures enchanted player controls attack each combat if able. Although this is a very simple curse, it can be absolutely devastating on a player that, well, doesn't want to attack. Maybe their key creatures are quite small and quite vulnerable in combat, or, well, maybe they don't want to just be wide open every single turn for other players to attack them. And of course, we can shrink their creatures and make them less effective with something like Curse of Death's Hold. It says creatures enchanted player controls get -1/-1, so if you're playing against a token deck, well, have fun. And then Curse of Verbosity is one that can be incredibly effective. It says whenever enchanted player is attacked, you draw a card. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. So again, we give a player a reason to attack that player, and whenever that player is attacked, we benefit as well. Next up, how about some very different curses with Curse of Restless Dead and Curse of Echoes? Curse of Restless Dead says whenever a land enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. So if you're going up against a landfall deck or basically any green deck, have fun making a lot of zombies. And then Curse of Echoes is actually just one of my favorite cards in general. It says whenever enchanted player casts an instant or sorcery spell, each other player may copy that spell, may choose new targets for the copy they control. Basically, put this on a spell-slinging mage, and everyone else gets a ton of benefits from them casting spells. But my favorite thing to do is to put this on a blue mage, and then, well, everyone can just counter their counter spells, so no more control for you. Regardless, next up, let's talk about some ways to dish out some damage with Curse of the Pierced Heart, Curse of Shaken Faith, and Maddening Hex. Curse of the Pierced Heart says, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, Curse of the Pierced Heart deals 1 damage to that player. Curse of Shaken Faith says, whenever enchanted player casts a spell other than the first spell they cast each turn or copies the spell, Curse of Shaken Faith deals 2 damage to them. And Maddening Hex says, whenever enchanted player casts a non-creature spell, roll a d6. Maddening Hex deals damage to that player equal to the result, then attach Maddening Hex to another one of your opponent's chosen at random. So yeah, either consistent damage or damage based off of actions of opponents, or, consistent random damage from Maddening Hex, which can be a lot of fun. And of course, we can take our opponents down even further with things like Trespasser's Curse, Torment of Scarabs, and Curse of Thirst. Trespasser's Curse says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, that player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, against token decks, have fun. And then Torment of Scarab says, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discards a card. But perhaps the best way to finish an opponent off with this curse deck might be Curse of Thirst, which says, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, Curse of Thirst deals damage to that player equal to the number of curses attached to him or her. Again, as this game goes on, we can attach more and more curses to a player, and we can really build things up to, well, dish out a lot of pain with this. But next up, though, we've got some different kind of curses with Curse of Leeches and a Cursed Witch. And I promise there's a curse involved in this one somehow. It's not just a creature, okay? Curse of Leeches says, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, they lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. And it's got day bound, so it's gonna flip essentially to the other side when, it becomes night. And on top of that, obviously, it says, as this permanent transforms into Curse of Leeches, attach it to a player, so basically it's going to be able to flip back. Let's go to the back. Because on the backside, we've got a 4/4 life-linking, night-bound, leeching lurker. So essentially, this is a curse that can flip between being a creature and a curse, and yeah, we can move it around. And then a Cursed Witch says, spells your opponents cast that target a Cursed Witch cost 1 less to cast. On top of that, when she dies, return to the battlefield transformed under your control attached to target opponent. It transforms into Infectious Curse, which says, enchant player, spells you cast that target enchanted player cost 1 less to cast. At the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. But the final curses that I'm going to be bringing up are some really heavy hitting ones with Curse of Unbinding, Curse of Obsession, and Curse of Surveillance. Curse of Unbinding says, enchant player, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield under your control, that player puts the rest of the revealed cards into their graveyard. So yeah, if you're going up against a creature heavy deck with some really heavy hitters, well, you can hit your opponents really hard with them. So yeah, this can definitely be a great finisher in the right situation. Next up though, there's Curse of Obsession, which says, at the beginning of enchanted players draw a step, that player draws 2 additional cards, and at the beginning of the enchanted players end step, that player discards their hand. There are plenty of decks out there that count on having a hand during their opponent's turn, so losing that, well, that would be just not good for them. And speaking of not good for them, finally there's Curse of Surveillance, which says, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, any number of target players other than that player each draw cards equal to the number of curses attached to that player. So yeah, this can help you draw an absurd amount of cards in absolutely no time. And in the right scenario, you can probably mill players out with it as well. Regardless, now that we've talked about curses, let's talk about actually getting to them and making the most of them. So of course, we're going to be utilizing some more standard card advantage spells like Faithless Looting, Read the Bones, Painful Truths, Fact or Fiction, Epiphany the Drowned Yard, Precognitive Perception, Reign of Revelation, and Behold the Multiverse. But on top of these more standard draw spells, I really want to highlight cards like Perilous Research and Read the Runes. Perilous Research says, draw 2 cards and sacrifice a permanent. Now, usually that would be a downside, but again, for this deck, that is an upside. We can cast this, let's say, on the opponent's turn right before ours to sacrifice one of our curses. It's going to come back at the end step attached to us, but then on our upkeep, which again isn't going to be very far away, we get to move it away and then draw 2 cards. So this is basically, hey, reattach a curse to whoever you want and draw 4 cards. And then Read the Runes can be even more effective. It says, draw X cards for each card drawn this way, discard a card unless you sacrifice a permanent. So if we want to sacrifice multiple curses with this, we can. Though, do keep in mind that we can only move 1 curse away from us during our upkeep, so yeah, be careful. Regardless, we've got other ways to sacrifice our curses as well with things like Final Flare and Slaughter Priest of Mogus. Final Flare is going to make us sacrifice a creature or enchantment as initial cost to cast this spell, and it's going to deal 5 damage to target creature. So we can take out a decently large creature with this, and also get to move one of our curses on top of that. And then Slaughter Priest of Mogus has, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and by paying 2, we can sacrifice another creature or an enchantment to give it first strike until end of turn. So for this deck's purposes, this is basically a delayed card draw, just pay 2, draw 2 cards on your upkeep. But there are some other ways that we can take advantage of sacrificing our enchantments and having them come back. So now let's talk about constellation cards with cards like Doomwake Giant, Grim Guardian, and Protean Thaumaturge. Doomwake Giant says, whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. So again, if we've got something like Read the Runes or Slaughter Priest of Mogus, or if the player that we just have, enchanted with all of those aura curses just happens to lose the game, well, we're going to be getting a ton of enchantments in play. And when that happens, our opponent's creatures are going to get wiped out thanks to this. We can also drain out an opponent very effectively with Grim Guardian. It says whenever it or other enchantment enters the battlefield under control, each opponent loses 1 life. And then Protean Thaumaturge says whenever enchantment enters the battlefield under control, you may have it become a copy of another target creature except it has this ability. So yeah, this is a shapeshifter that we can just change between one creature and another. Most likely going to be one of our opponent's very, powerful creatures on the board. Or actually, how about just another copy of like Doomwake Giant? Why not? Or maybe it could be a copy of our Golden Pig of the deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Thought Render Lamia. Thought Render Lamia is a 5/3 enchantment creature, Lamia, whatever that is, that costs 4 black. It has Constellation. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent discards a card. This card can be absolutely brutal and can just shut down our opponents in absolutely no time. Again, if we cast something like Read the Runes and we sacrifice a bunch of our curses and they come back into play, this is going to trigger a ton and our opponents aren't going to have any hands. Or again, just taking out the player that we have a ton of curses on can essentially be the exact same thing, just getting all those curses back. Yes, they're attached to us, but our opponents, well, they don't have any hands. And not having a hand means that our opponents are going to be top decking and praying that they've got a way to deal with this, and if they don't, they're going to be in big trouble, and yeah. This card can just solidify our position in a game and can easily help us shut our opponents down, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. But we're not quite done with ways to take advantage of this Constellation card just yet. So now let's talk about some board wipes that can really help us out in multiple ways with Fade Away and Ratchet Bomb. Fade Away says, for each creature its controller sacrifices a permanent unless they pay 1. So this is a board wipe that can actually really catch opponents off guard. If an opponent is tapped out or, doesn't have much mana and they have a lot of creatures on the board, well, they're going to be losing a lot of things. And even if we do have mana, we can choose not to pay it to sacrifice some curses to get them to come back into play again to trigger that Constellation. And then Ratchet Bomb is an artifact that we can tap to put a charge counter on it, and then we can tap to sacrifice it, destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on it. So this can help us out in a lot of situations, and it can help us actually take out some of our own curses again to get them to come back into play. Regardless, of course, we also have some other board wipes with things like Hex, Aether Gale, Whelming Wave, Nevinyrral's Disc, and Displacement Wave. And since we're going through lists, let's talk about our targeted removal cards with Into the Royal, Blink of an Eye, Depart the Realm, Ravenform, and Expel from Maraska. And of course, we're going to be running some counterspells in this deck with, well, Counterspell, which is now somehow under $1, thank you. Arcane Denial, also somehow under $1, thank you. And Negate, which has pretty much always been under $1. In fact, I don't think it's ever gone over. And then let's quickly go through our ramp package with Everflowing Chalice, Arcane Signet, Mindstone, Rakdos Signet, Izzet Signet, Prismatic Lens, Fire Diamond, Charcoal Diamond, and Sky Diamond. And then 2 non-mana rocks that can help us with ramp are Nightscape Familiar and Solemn Simulacrum. Nightscape Familiar says blue and red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and we can pay 1 and a black to regenerate it. This cost reduction can really help us out throughout the game, and again, we can help keep this on the board by, well, regenerating it to keep it alive. And then Sad Robot is actually now budget as well, and when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a basic land card with that card on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and when it dies, you may draw a card. And finally, well, since we are giving our opponents, just out of the kindness of our heart, those curses, maybe they should give something back to us as well, and we can utilize things like Mob Rule and Mass Manipulation to make sure that happens. Mob Rule says choose 1, gain control of creatures with power 4 greater until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn, or the exact same thing but for creatures with power 3 or less. So we can either take control of all the big creatures or all these small creatures depending on what's on the board. And then Mass Manipulation just straight up says gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So we can utilize our opponent's best creatures to win the game. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned before, outside of the commander, every single card in this deck is less than $1. So because of that, the estimated cost for this deck is $36.16. Keep in mind that this estimated cost does include the cost of basic lands, so if you already have those, that's some extra savings right there. And speaking of extra savings, if you buy this deck on TCG Player and utilize heavily played and damaged cards, you might be able to get that price down even further because again, heavily played and damaged cards need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon your location. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.